All right, good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, and we're going to get started because we've got a lot to get through, and we most certainly have a quorum today. So thank you all for coming. It's great to see you again. We have handheld mics this time, so you can pass those around a little more easily than the table mics. Just as a reminder for everyone, this meeting is being audio recorded, and we're also recording it in alignment with the slides as well. So if we make motions associated with slides, when you go back to listen to the recording, you'll be able to see the slides that we were talking about at that time. All right, let's just do a quick round table. Please introduce yourselves. We'll start down here on this end. Matt, please.
Matt Lascala, dispensary agent.
Joe Demena, registered qualified.
Jay Neary, registered caregiver.
Tabitha, lab owner.
Murray Stein, dispensary agent.
Ryan Hurley, Arizona Dispensaries Association.
Hope Jones.
Steve Cottrell, Marijuana Industry Trade Association.
George Griffith, Arizona Cannabis Laboratory Association.
R.D. Hendrickson, dispensary agent.
Vince Figarelli, Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory.
Tom Salo, department.
Megan Whitby, department.
And Steve Baker, the department.
Stephanie Elzinga, the department.
And Jessica Riggle, I'm chairing this committee. Quick to review the agenda with you all. We're going to go over the committee's charge. We're going to have a very, very brief lab update. We just want to make sure we clarify a couple of things we're hearing. We're going to continue our discussion of recommendations for testing and potency standards. And then if we have time, we'll get into some of the additional things that are part of the council's charge, and then do a meeting wrap up. I'll note, and hopefully you saw that we have a summarized list of all the motions that were made at the last meeting that are posted online, and they're in front of you. This does not include the E. coli motion, which was made at the preceding meeting. So after this meeting, I'll put together a full summary of all the motions that have been passed to date. So we've got that online for anyone who's trying to track or get your lab stood up or any of that. I'll also note today that my goal, and hopefully all of yours as well, is to get through the rest of our testing recommendations. So to finish up on microbials, move on to solvents, heavy metals, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, growth regulators, and see if we can close all that out today. We have 2 meetings following this one, and so I'm hoping to get through the other charges of the committee, as well as I know there are additional recommendations that many of you have made for items to discuss, including some mechanisms to improve communication with the stakeholders so that we meet these deadlines in a timely fashion, the department supporting you with the information that you need, as well as some other things that have been brought up. So hopefully we can get through all of that in our remaining 2 meetings after this. I will move on very, very briefly to the council's charge. Just as a reminder, we're here today to work on these 5 bullets. I'm not going to read them to you because I did that a week ago, and I feel like you're pretty familiar with this now. Okay. So we're going to move on to a very quick lab update. I just asked Megan and Steve to clarify a couple of questions that have come up and give any additional updates on kind of lab certification status.
Good morning, everyone. So as we've told you before, we are prepared to accept applications and process those applications, do that initial inspection to get the lab certified, which will then allow them to apply for the lab agent cards. We have all of that in place. So far, we have received 2 applications. One is still in the administrative review process, but I can tell you is missing quite a few things, so it will be getting a notice of deficiency very soon. The other one was sent a request for information, and I believe tomorrow is the deadline for us to receive that requested information for it. If we don't receive that information, then that application would be denied according to Title 41 statutes, okay? And that initial lab certification, again, that's what allows you to have medical marijuana in your labs. It allows your lab agents to possess, to start getting your methods and everything ready. There will be that secondary approval process later once we have all of the recommendations from the committee and the testing standards are actually in rule. Then the certified labs will be able to apply for approval to actually conduct those tests and provide the results required to the dispensaries. So we just wanted to clarify that. It will be a 2-step process. You get your certification and then you apply to be able to provide the results. Everybody good? Anything you'd like to add, Steve?
So for the initial certification, you only need to be certified for one thing or something. for the ISO and or the TNI part, because that allows you then to become legal. So once we get the standard in place and know what we actually are going to test for, then the next round we will start, the department will certify you for actual tests. And so you'll need ISO certification for each one of those tests in the future. All right? We just wanted to clarify that.
We good? Questions? Okay. All right, so we're going to return back now to our discussion with recommendations for testing and potency standards. We got through potency last time, so I guess very quickly I will just ask if anyone has any further last-minute comments on potency. I made a note of one towards the end of here, so we had talked, we passed some motions last meeting is about what kinds of things would be tested for in potency, what the formulas would be, percentage within label claims, significant figures, edibles, and methods. And then there was one note here about results below the limit of detection that came up, so I just want to ask if anyone want to talk about that. Murray, go ahead. And sorry, please introduce yourself as you speak, too.
This is Murray Stein, dispensary agent. I was just, when I was going through the notes prior to the meeting, I keep getting hung up on, if you could go back one slide. One more? Another? There we go. Into the first bullet, and any label claims. I think I know what that means, but does this require definition? Do we need to be specific about any label claims regarding potency? You know, I mean, is that adequate? Or, you know, this is always a funny place to be, because the FDA, when the time comes, is going to be all over claims on these products, and we're going to see lots of letters from the FDA about this. So we're already thinking about what we need to do to be careful. So I'm assuming what you mean by label claims is if we say, for example, contains a certain amount of CBN, for example, for sleep or whatnot, that we would need to show proof of that in terms of the testing. But I just want to be sure. Is there anybody else that's like, do we need more detail here?
This is Hope Jones. The intent was any cannabinoid label claim.
Are we okay to leave it that way? Or
I think so. As far as the FDA, believe me, they will tell us exactly how they want it when they put it into the regs and everything. So right now, there's a slight differences around the nation, but that will all get synchronized, I believe.
If anyone would like to make a clarifying motion that it's any cannabinoid label claim, that is something we can certainly.
Jay Neary, before we do that, what about terpenes? So if they're making any claims on terpenes or anything else, you don't want to consider that?
Well, this is Murray Stein again. Terpenes aren't actually referenced in terms of the requirements for potency. So that becomes, I think, optional.
Someone had made some recommendations surrounding terpenes. I have that as an other slide at the end of this talk if we want to discuss terpenes as a separate topic.
I move that we clarify label claims to reference specific to cannabinoids.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? Okay. That passes unanimously. All right, just wanted to clarify. And then back to this. Yeah, go ahead.
To the 2 slides before, please.
Yeah. More? Sorry. Okay.
Hope Jones, I wanted to clarify this that we passed, that the reporting should be based off of the 3 bullets there, or if it's not detectable, or if the instrumentation being used does not have the sensitivity, it would be reported as below limit of detection.
comments on that?
Is that, it's Jay Neary, is that saying that the machine itself, compared to somebody else's, somebody else could process that low and one couldn't? I mean, isn't that the standard that it's setting? It's saying that you have to meet this threshold, so if you don't have the right machine, you got to get it?
So this part of it, I think we should put off because even in the environmental field, we go hours talking about limits of detection versus the limit of quantitation. So the limit of detection is a statistical, theoretical kind of thing that you establish using this formula that says that you think you can see something at a certain level. So when we're talking about the limit of quantitation, which is where you should have maybe your lowest standard, your limit of detection is lower than that, but is statistical. So I recommend that we maybe put this off for now and try to get through the other, because I can tell you all the different parts of the weaknesses and everything behind trying to get down to limit of detections. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah,
Maybe we get some more information on it for the next meeting so we could look at it and be prepared.
Well, even right now, even on the environmental side, there's kind of a transition going on because the formulas, well, I won't get into how they were formed, but we can definitely try to get more information on limit of detection versus limit of quantitation.
So my concern here was specifically for the cannabinoids that we are required to mention. So if one were to create a CBD only product that you made out of CBD isolate, for example, and should have absolutely zero THC in it, if you're claiming on your label or you're having to test for THC regardless, and you're saying it's zero, then all of a sudden we have to make sure that that equipment can report down to 3 decimal places. And I just don't know if that equipment is capable of doing that, or if that requires, additional equipment that we weren't thinking of. So that was my concern on that particular issue.
Well, I think we will be establishing, again, that our safety limits that we're setting up right now, the limit of quantitation should be half of that level. And so that would be the point at which, if that's where your lowest standard is, you really shouldn't be quantitating below that level anyhow. So I think that once we set up the limits, it's going to be apparent at what levels we're going to have as our low limit. There's not going to be zero on anything. It'll say less than a specific number, which will be your limit of quantitation.
So then would it be appropriate to modify the recommendation to say or below limit of quantitation? Because as it sits right now, we're basically saying that you have to report it down to 3 decimal places.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're going to have anything that low.
Yeah, it's pretty low right there.
So right now, if we get through our limits and we don't have something that fits in there, maybe then we can drop that part out.
Well, no, but I'm talking, this is for potency.
Oh, potency,
right?
that's
This
right.
is potency. So
Okay.
this is CBD and THC and any other label claim, I suppose. But my concern was specifically on the CBD or THC that we are required to report.
Yeah.
So I will have to put on the label that it has 0.0001 or 0.001 THC, even though the equipment may or may not be able to actually detect it that low. So I'm required to put that on there, so I feel like there should be a or below the level of detection or whatever the proper quantitation, whatever the proper scientific term is.
I think I'd have to leave this with Tabitha or some of the other labs because I don't know what the low levels are. We haven't been
It's
into
like
labs.
0.1%, less than
Yeah.
0.1%. I think I have to look at one more.
So I think we'd have to look at this very specifically with each cannabinoid, what's possible to see.
Cannabinoids at all.
But now you have to. That's my whole point.
No, that's just saying how many decimal places we have to use, not where we report to. That's only about decimal places.
Right, but if I have to put CBD on there and I'm saying it has 0, so you're gonna just say it's .000?
No, I'm gonna put less in my reporting limit.
Well, that's exactly what I'm asking, is that we modify the motion to say less than the reporting limit or limit quantification.
You can add a fourth bullet.
So, I mean, yeah, and it's completely appropriate for the council, if you so choose, to recommend that the department considers in its rules to make mention of reporting to less than the quantitation limit or something like that, so that that gets included.
Hope Jones, I make motion to add a fourth bullet that we add or below limit of quantitation.
Second that? Would that apply to the edibles as well?
It really is for anything, because you shouldn't be reporting anything below your limit of quantitation.
So it would be a third major bullet. Or below limit of quantitation.
Second.
So the motion on the table is to add a third primary bullet. So we've got one about potency recording with the significant figures and these 3 sub-bullets. Another one with edibles and the 2 significant figures, and then a third bullet that would be about potency reporting below, notating below limit of quantitation, if that is relevant for your reporting. Is that clear? Motion in a second. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
This is Murray Stein again, dispensary agent. If we could go back to the potency slide, 2 slides before, I think. Oh, there, that one right there. I'd like to ask that we consider altering this to say within plus or minus 20%, just for clarity. So I motion that we do that.
Second. Yay. I agree with that. I mean, it's just more clear, although, yeah.
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Last call on not last forever, last call right now on potency before I jump to microbial contamination.
The only thing I had was for the, I don't know if we're gonna come back to it later when we come to the metal rules, how do we affirm the cannabinoids are homogeneous throughout? I don't know if we're gonna attack that today or that was gonna be later on, because that.
We do that under sampling and.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a note of that to make sure we cover it under sampling. All right. So we had some motions passed last meeting and the meeting before about microbial contamination that essentially say all products have to be tested for both E. coli and salmonella and set some limits for those. And then this kind of bifurcated process for aspergillus and mycotoxins, which is kind of an either or that the council passed and set up. Any comments on these? Someone telling me I got it wrong. I tried my best to translate it. Okay. All right. So there's a couple other slides based on some member recommendations related to microbial contamination that I put up here so that the council could see recommendations that have come from members. This first is related to aflatoxins. And I'm putting it up here for consideration. There doesn't need to be a motion at all. I just want folks to have a chance to consider it. We good to move? Okay. The next one was about yeast and molds. Any comments on this one? And then one for some of the other potential contaminants like Pseudomonas listeria, toxigenic E. coli, other bacterial pathogens.
just want to make sure, I mean, no need to test the cannabis flower, but, I mean, we're creating food products as well, where these could potentially be an issue, could they not?
So you can see these in just about anything. But what you look at when you're and we find these in just about anything, but you don't usually set up routine testing on things that don't have the potential to show these as routine. You can test every product for just about anything to be safe, but if, as I was going through the paper that was talking about why this isn't relevant to this type of testing, I think that this is fine. If we were talking about eggs or, cheese or milk or certain things that are vulnerable to some of these things, then that would be legitimate to want to do these things. But for actual marijuana products, I assume that at some point, some of the products out there will have hits possibly on some of these, just like any other food product, but it's not because of the marijuana.
I would just add to that on the food safety regulation side, just similar just to if you think about restaurants or other kinds of food establishments that are preparing food, they don't have routine testing for some of these contaminants there, but their food safety inspections look at hot holding, cold temperatures, food handling practices, and all of that in order to try and assess safety. So time and temperature as a safety mechanism for that.
This is Murray Stein, dispenser agent. As I understand it also, if we do in fact test for water activity, for example, in our infused products, and we don't see sufficient, that's one marker to ensure that Listeria can't grow.
Jane Erie, can we go back to the other slide on aflatoxins? It's got some recommendations here, partially degraded by heat. Seedless cannabis is not capable of supporting. I mean, I know they're trying to grow seedless cannabis, but I mean, it's part of the nature. Their seeds get in there. There's different things that happen. The plant goes too far, it starts to seed itself. I mean, this is just like kind of, hey, it might not happen. It's a 50-50 chance, so still a 50% chance that it's bad. And most other states are testing for aflatoxin, orchotoxins, especially if it failed micro testing. So I think we should consider the same thing. If we're having these other standards, we're checking these. If it's failed, then we can check for more details.
This is Hope Jones. Jay, I appreciate your concern on that. I have not seen evidence of the aflatoxins in cannabis products being present or problematic, and I do think since we have the ability to revisit these rules on an annual basis, is this correct? Annual, am I right?
Most states say that they have to do it annually just because allergen is changing.
I think that we, based off of the other micro recommendations, in particular the water activity as well, following what is known and has been present and seen as a health risk. And I think that we should reserve this one for future and back it up with data, not necessarily just because other states are doing it.
I'll try to bring in as much as I can about Colorado and some other states who have failed for aflatoxins and present that to you guys, and then we can talk about it again.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Was there additional conversation on this one?
Murray Stein, dispenser, I just wanted to add that one thing we need to bear in mind when we're testing for some of these bacteriological agents is the shelf life impact. Some tests take days or longer, and for some products which are 30 days or 45-day shelf life, that can be a death sentence. We've got to move the product through the product line, waiting for test data. If we had to perform this test and had to wait another week and a half, that would kill some of our products.
slide in here about method considerations for doing some of this testing.
Did we want to add the same verbiage as we did all the other ones? I mean, hope. Makes sense, gives us a little more flexibility.
Yep.
Make it. Do the motions. No. I draw the line.
So you can look on page 6, there's some of that verbiage on the packet.
On the new one?
Yeah.
Of a reputation. Okay. Hope Jones, I make motion that for method considerations for microbial contamination, use the Bacteriological Analytical Manual, FDA 2013A, and any other federal or international validated methods. So basically that bullet plus what we said on page 6, slide 2.
So the motion would be to use the Bacteriological Analytical Manual validated by AOAC Appendix J or other federal or international standards that meet the criteria?
Yes.
Is that, okay.
See, why don't you do that?
You're so good at it.
I heard a second over here on that motion.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? Okay. Got it. Any other items that folks want to mention before we move on from microbial contamination today? I understand Jay will bring back some information about aflatoxin for the next meeting.
Hope Jones, did we have water activity in here? Did we approve that?
I have water activity as a slide towards the end because it's not a measure of microbial contamination, but a measure of the ability for microbial contamination.
And there's some question whether we have the authority yet for water activity, because it's not one of those things specified in the statute. So it is something that I think is a good thing that the legislature needs to think about here.
So are we saying we can't make the recommendation because then I would be opposed to not having total yeast and mold?
I think it's within the council's purview to make a recommendation.
Okay.
I think, but as far as whether we can actually do it, I think so.
One of the tests on the bill first, the test board. That's why.
That
But the department would not be opposed to it.
Yeah.
to
Because
just offer it, but it wouldn't be a requirement? We need, I need clarification because if we can't make that recommendation and if we can't, if the department then can't include that as part of the rules, then for me, that changes my opinion on total yeast and mold recommendation.
And it affects how we test our products, because if we know we can do water activity in any state, then we're not going to be as concerned about catching some of the microbial stuff earlier on.
I hear there's a rumor that it may be on a change coming.
Okay.
There's a couple of updates, so I don't know if there's anybody that can address that, but I've heard a rumor.
Okay, Steve.
That's clear.
There has been talk, George Griffith, the Lab Association, there has been a folder opened at the legislature to facilitate some minor tweaks to SB 1494 to stop these roadblocks that we're running into and issues exactly like water activity, which are not included on the statutory list. But I think the way to approach it would be to make the recommendations that the council wants and wait for the legislature to catch up. If
What
that's,
about removing the one herbicide?
yeah, includes removing herbicides, just some minor tweaks,
Just
but
throw that out
that's
there.
coming. It's just not time yet for the legislature to address that.
Okay. we do have water activity on a slide further in here. Heavy metals. We move to heavy metals. Great. So I wanted to share with you, here's another member recommendation for heavy metals. That's your table that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. I did want to make a note from the department standpoint that chromium is something that has been included in other states. And another thing, when we had done some research, there were some different limits for inhalable products versus other products as well. So anyway, I just wanted to provide that as background as the council considers recommendations around what metals to test for and the limits at which you're interested in recommending that.
So as far as the member recommendation, this is actually Maryland's limit. So I wanted to know why Maryland had that limit. So I've actually talked with the Maryland people, and they put together this limit, and this is for everything. It doesn't distinguish between inhalable or consumable or anything. It's just this applies to everything. And they're getting that from a document. They actually are getting it from a document. It's the Q3D elemental impurities document. And they're getting, and it's being calculated from 5 milligrams per day of dosing. And so there's a backing there for what they're doing. However, it's for everything. So what we had proposed on the other side was more of a Michigan approach where they have actually split it out. Some of the limits are higher, some are lower. And also chrome was one that Maryland, Michigan, and others had found that chrome was something that they are looking at and are finding in levels that are very high.
Jay Neary here. I just want to ask, like Tabitha and Hope, have you guys any experience with chrome? Any that you found or?
We don't analyze for chromium, so I'm unsure about that. But the only time we see metals is in the flower product, probably from the soil. It's the only time I get
Steve
details.
Cottrell, Marijuana Industry Trade Association. The chromium has come up recently through cartridges, Jay.
And also what the other states are saying, because they've tried to track back. The problem they're having is like chocolate they found is naturally high in chrome, which they were unaware of. So then but the chrome was coming from the stainless steel that's around from shears and all the stainless steel. I mean, stainless steel is great to have, but it does give you a little bit of chrome. And so when they're finding the elevated levels, most of it is coming from chrome from shears and just the stainless steel.
Ryan Hurley, Arizona Dispensaries Association. It's my understanding that it's one particular type of chromium that we're concerned about, right? The hexavalent, chromium 6 instead of chromium 3. That's my understanding. So I think if we're going to talk about that we probably should specify that out. I would like some discussion about why on the limits versus the member recommendations, which I presume came from you, Hope, and the differences between the other side there, the Michigan limits, I guess, with the USP limits. I wonder if you could address that, what your thoughts were there. Some of them are more permissive, some of them are less.
What limits are you getting your heavy metals tested at right now?
I'm sure. I didn't bring my report with me. I don't know.
So this is Hope. This is information that was, so in the lab that I used to work with, we did not test heavy metals. So I have to defer. There is one lab in the state that does a lot of heavy metal testing, IAS. I do wish maybe they were here to speak to this because they do a lot of this testing. So there's concern from fertilizer getting into the plant material and actually being in the flower. And so I do actually agree with inhalable and other. So I wish I would have made that recommendation. I do like the breakdown better on the right myself, seeing that and then talking with other growers. The limits, the ppm recommendations are based off of literature from other tested cannabis that was gathered, and again, I did not bring that information today, so I apologize, I cannot provide actual data reference. And the inhalable, because of the cartridge and other concerns, I think it's fair, and I don't see any reason to limit the chromiums from a testing perspective. I think if you have one, and I'm, again, just bear with me as I mumble for a second. I'm trying to think in the literature if there was one over the other that was cited, and oftentimes it was just chromium, not the actual breakdown of which unit. And I don't know, Steve, if you have more information, or George, if you can provide some additional feedback here.
So there's 2 points I'd like to make. We don't have to be stuck with chromium for the rest of our life here. It may be worthy to start out with it, and then if we're not seeing an issue here, in March 2021, which is about, 4 months or so after all these products have got their first screens and everything, if we're not seeing chromium as an issue, we can always drop this out. But I think just to know what is going on, because other states have seen it, and maybe a good thing to start with. I actually asked Michigan where they got their chromium limits, and where they got that from is they actually had labs go in, and they were looking at their LOQ, something that was above what they see in chocolate and everything, a comfortable level that says, yes, this is coming from above chocolate or above the actual chromium and other products, and the labs can actually see it. So I talked to Michigan on where they got the chrome levels.
Let me ask Jay Neary, what's the difference in adding this other test lab-wise, cost-wise, machine-wise, anything like that? How's that work out? Tabitha or Hope, how, if we added chromium?
We're having to add a whole ICP-MS, so I'm really not sure the cost right now, but you're talking from 100 to 300,000 for everything to get just the metals up and going. I'm not sure of chromium in particular.
So they'd still be, you have to buy the new machine anyway, but chromium would be in that new machine?
I would imagine so, but I can't say for certain. I know the other 4 are ran by ICP-MS or ICP, but I'm not quite sure. I'm assuming so. I don't know if they can be ran with the other 4.
So okay. On the environmental side, they do a lot of metals and different things. So a lot more in this, in screens, and typically mixes will have this in anyhow. It's just a matter of doing some of the.
So is it like one test, one day, one process, you get a whole list of them?
It's all done at the same time. So all 5 of those metals are done at the same time within like 2 or 3 minutes is the total time for the test. So it's pretty quick. It's just a matter of setting up the calibration and then setting up so that it'll quantitate and it'll automatically calculate everything. So it's actually, once it's set up, it's pretty quick to add something.
So this is Matt LaScala, dispensary agent. We've just seen a lot of different contaminants of, a lot of these metals in a lot of different products, given the wide nature of what's available, at our disposal for soil mixes, different sprays and whatnot. So I would say, given, the abilities of the labs currently, and also the ability of the regulation to be edited, given, some flexibility down the line, I would say we go with the more permissive limits, or maybe we wait to get a little more feedback from IES or the lab that runs most of these metal tests, so we can understand what some of these detection limits are, what they're actually encountering. Otherwise, I think we're kind of stabbing in the dark because we don't have really heavy.
You say you've done tests and you've run into metals?
But we have, but we will run, and we've run metals across other products as well as finished flour. So we've seen it in sprays.
Do you see any of these predominantly here in Arizona?
Lead, I would say, would be probably the largest contaminant that you encounter, like the largest adulterant. But again, that's just internal data that, we've just some screens that we've run. So I would say just knowing that we can edit and knowing that we have some flexibility here, we might want to table until we get a little better, or we go with the permissive limits.
So this is Murray Stein again, dispensary agent. We looked at California and Colorado standards, and by and large, the standards that these are yours, Hope, I guess, on the left. BHS. So under cadmium, they've got 0.5 parts per million. In fact, Colorado's 2.5 times that. They're twice the standard on other as California, although on the inhalable mercury products, they're 10 times less than Colorado. So
Sorry, Jay Neary, I've got Colorado in front of me. Arsenic it's exactly the same as what's on the left. That's Colorado. That's my personal
Right.
preference.
That is correct. Yeah, I have the same, California, Colorado have the same numbers reported. Two points, though, I want to make. One is, Jessica, I think we mean metal, not solvent, in those two charts.
You definitely do. Thank you.
And then the last thing is, we're an edibles manufacturer, and from our perspective, you would test for your solvents at the concentrate stage. We use crude concentrate for our products. So we're looking for as much material there as possible. We test those concentrates for, pesticides or whatever else, but particularly heavy metals. Wouldn't that remove the requirement to then test the infused edible product that comes from that?
The way the current statute is set up, it's for finished product only. So we're not set up to do testing at different parts of the process. We're set up for finished product.
So to that question, then, if you look at, say, Oregon or other states that have had testing programs come into being, a number of variables affected that success or lack thereof. One being the labs couldn't keep up, the number of tests they had performed, but also the high cost of testing so many things. So I've already mentioned latency as a consideration for us in terms of testing. If suddenly the labs were out 3 weeks, and that can happen and has happened before, that destroys a product and its market. So, we're looking for further conversations about the sorts of things that Oregon and other states have done in terms of sampling plans, validation programs, and so on, to prove that we can develop and establish a process that we follow that will enable us to not have to test every single batch of every single product made. To me, that's a critical consideration this committee has to address, is how we manage that.
So I have a note for our future discussions on sampling to, one, talk about the homogeneity of cannabinoids, but also to talk about the latency in testing and what that sampling process looks like.
Ryan Hurley, Arizona Dispensaries Association. Matt, I just maybe perhaps clarify what your thoughts are on this. Are there any of these that we could establish today based on existing knowledge, or is your suggestion that we simply table these recommendations and approach them at a later time with more scientific?
I would say we look into it. We contact IES or whoever the body is that does the largest amount of metal testing currently, and we just understand what they see. That would be my recommendation.
Do you believe that we have time to do that in this commission in the next 2 meetings, so we could table that today and have a more informed discussion next time?
I believe we could solicit that information. I probably could pull it together for you.
The one thing I would add is I'm not sure IAS is going to even become certified. And the technology they're using maybe isn't what is the recommended technology. They have ICP. The recommended instrumentation is ICP mass spec that is used out there.
Right now, that's what we're utilizing, and I said I didn't know. I looked up our reporting limits. Arsenic is 0.001, or no, 0.002 ppm. Cadmium is 0.004 ppm. Mercury is 0.013 ppm, and lead is 0.009 ppm. We're able to see pretty low. Report pretty low. That's
Tabitha,
our
are you
reporting.
doing those in-house,
So we
or are you
report anything. Yeah. Well, no, we subcontract it out to LP Analytical.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Or Lone Pine Analytical.
What are the chances of allowing a Arizona Department of Health Services certified environmental lab to be able to send samples to on just these products on heavy metals, so that the expense to many of the cannabis labs on the front end is not happening right away?
They would still have to be certified, and we have a great deal of capability in the environmental labs, but they look at this right now and say, wow, that's a lot of security we'd have to add. That's a lot of inventory. There's a lot of stuff that they aren't doing right now. And right now, I've talked to a lot of them, like Legend does some of this testing in Minnesota, and Eurofins, and these are large national labs that easily have this capability. But right now, it's just something that, because of the security and the inventory and all the stuff, and having to segregate and get cards for all their people in the lab and everything, it's just not something they're looking at.
This is Hope, and I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, Matt, and so forgive me here. Because cannabis is a metal accumulator, because there is evidence of, and now I'm referring to the table on the right, there is evidence and has been evidence of these metals in cannabis products. And because we can make changes to this, and we have that ability coming in the near future, I'm confident making a motion that we accept the table on the right. And I will see if there's a second there.
I will second that.
So we have a motion on the table to accept the table on the right, I'm assuming with the name change from solvent to metal. Pardon my typo. And that's the table that differentiates the inhalable from the other limits, correct?
Can we have some discussion on that?
Absolutely.
I guess I would not be supportive of that motion just because I still have not gotten my head around what the differences between the limits are, and it feels like we're stabbing in the dark right now to a certain extent. And I would like to review where Colorado, Oregon, other states are besides just Michigan. That's what you took was from Colorado's on the left. And so Colorado made no distinction between inhalable and other. So I feel like we don't have enough knowledge at this point. So
I've actually put out the slide. It was one of the original things that I did. Actually showed all of the different limits that are coming from all the different states. They tend to be in 3 different groups. There's one group that is going with the AHP standards. There's a whole bunch of people that are then going by the USP limit. And then there's another group that are kind of going on another modification, which I think is coming off that Q3D. So you can see there's a number of states that are running off of the USB standard, which I had on the right. There's another group that are down on the AHP, but we were having a hard time figuring out body weights and exactly where the AHP is coming from. So those are the limits that each of the states have actually developed and have in regulation.
Do you want me to see if I can pull that up on the screen? Would that be helpful for discussion, or would folks like to table this for further study, move forward? There is a motion on the table currently, so we have to take that to a vote unless there's...
Joe DeMena here. I'd like to table it just because it sounds like we've got a lot we need to discuss. I realize that, you know, we've got a lot to pack into these next couple meetings, but we got to do this right. And I'm working under the assumption that these rules will be in place for a while. I mean, it's great to think that we'll be able to change them, but we want to get it right. At least I do.
Steve, if we consider the table on the right, I believe an ICP could probably handle those detection limits. Are you going to allow for that without a confirmation method?
So I'm not an ICP expert, so I got some of those on board, but we will allow any instrument to hit these levels if they can do it. So I've been to IAS, I've looked at their ICP. They think that they can hit it. They're just not sure they want to go to the expense of doing this because that's not their main business. But
I'm just wondering if, cost-wise for cannabis labs to bring it on, you could potentially just purchase ICP, not ICP-MS, for those type of limits. But then again, you might get
it depends on the product too. Some of the products you'll get quite a few interferences.
That's what I'm saying. Are you going to even give that consideration or make it be by mass spec?
well, both of them will have it. So, and ICP mass specs will get down to a lower level, which is why you have such low limits. Whereas an ICP, you would be looking at those and trying to get a half of that is what we're looking at for their detection limit. They'd be right on the edge on that.
Yeah.
So it's possible they could do it with an ICP, a really good one.
I mean, we already have a motion on the table, but since we're all talking about it, I would, after that, make a second motion, if it didn't pass, to do the column on the left, and then table conversation for Crominium later. We're not finished with the council. We can always adjust things here in our last conversation, but to move things forward, I think the column on the left is what most states are going by, and I would motion that if the first motion didn't pass.
All right, so I'm gonna push the motion to a vote. We have some discussion on it, motion in a second. So the motion is to adopt the table on the right. All in favor? All opposed? Motion fails. Thank you. Any additional discussion or motions?
I'll make a motion to table
Okay,
until the
I'll make
next.
the motion for the table on the left to be accepted, and then table Crominium for conversation later to see if it could possibly be added.
Second.
So the motion on the table is the table on the left, to adopt the table on the left at this time and review Chrome at a later date. All in favor?
Can I?
Yes, sorry, Ryan, go
Point
ahead.
of clarification. I hope you'd mentioned that you believe that that was the limits from Colorado. Can we clarify whether that's accurate or not before we move on this motion?
Well,
Because what you presented to me, Tabitha, did not appear to be the case.
this is what I got from the
This
initial,
is what we were getting out of the rankings from the other states.
but you also have inhalable, topical, a couple different categories, but they're still not exactly those limits.
As far as I know, that there's only 3 states that maybe have the limits on the left, is that correct?
You know, that looks like Maryland's on the left,
Yeah.
not Colorado's.
According to what Jay just passed me, it was Colorado.
Oh, well, okay, I'm looking at his list under Maryland's, and that's the one listed and not Colorado's.
Right, that's why I was confused.
Okay.
Your Colorado said something different than Jay's Colorado.
I think some of your original research said 2017 on it, so maybe some of the original research was old. When the first day you presented slides, had that date on the bottom.
It's possible. It was kind of a heavy lift for my group to try to get through all of the regs.
Yeah.
They're hard to read from other states anyway. But I don't think that there's maybe 3 or 4 that are using the one on the left. The one on the left, I think is 3 or 4 states maybe have. So
They do.
it's in the ballpark. It's not, if you look at the levels, there's little differences here and there, but it's a lot more lenient. Well, the only one that is less is the, if you look the other parts, they have some higher limits. So if you don't split it out and you have the one on the left for everything, then
So we have a motion and a second to accept the table on the left. Were you gonna? Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Motion fails. Would anyone else like to make a motion?
I move that we table this till the next meeting and see if we can learn a little bit more about metals and try to make a decision then.
Second?
Before I take this to a vote, I'd like to ask, Matt, are you gonna come back with information? Is there someone else on this council who's planning to come back, compiling that information to present back to the council members for this discussion?
I'll reach out. I'm happy to do that.
All right.
if I could get that update from you, Jay.
Absolutely.
I can update that chart and have it updated for the council next
Okay, so we have a motion to table metals till the next meeting. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Does anyone want to talk about the methods right now, or would you like to wait until? Okay. All right. Moving on to pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, growth regulators. You have on one slide the Oregon list and limits of the pesticide analytes and their action levels. And then there's a couple differing member recommendations that came forward to us, so I put them both up here. One is about implementing the Oregon list, the other about implementing the Colorado approved pesticide list.
Just want to make sure, based on these member recommendations, that we're framing the discussion correctly here, because there is a bit of a distinction. We're talking about what we're going to test for and the limits that we will pass, not necessarily what we are approving to use on cannabis and not. It looks like we're conflating those two different things here. Implementing the Colorado approved pesticide list versus the list that Oregon tests for. So I just want to make sure we all know what we're talking about when we go forward on this.
I don't think that they mean that it's an approved pesticide, like microbutanol. They're not saying that it's approved to be used. It just, these are the detectable parts per million that would be acceptable.
So I'd like to ask for this council, as you consider this, to consider this as recommendations you're making to the department to adopt rules around what pesticides are tested for and what action limits they are.
George Griffith, the Cannabis Lab Association. There is a group of people, scientists, working compound by compound through the Oregon list as we speak. It is a arduous and time-consuming process, but the idea is to look at every compound on the Oregon list with a critical eye to try and meet AZDHS's goals to minimize litigation while keeping the patient population safe, and that latter part coincides with our list. So I would ask, or our goal, I would ask that we give that process time to work. I would ask that we can discuss pesticides, but that we hold off on any votes and give the process time to work.
And we haven't talked about what other states have been through yet. So we have talked to many of the other states about what they have found in their first couple of years. So if you look at, from our discussion of Michigan, 80 to 90% of the products failed the testing. And the biggest one with the most products failing is pesticides. And then residual solvents, and then micro in the first 2 years. Those things, they say, kind of shake out. If you look at the literature in California, you find a lot of pesticides that are being found in the products and all. So when we talk to Colorado, they don't even approve of their own list. They said, please don't take our list. We think it's inadequate. We kind of got stuck with it. They have to get executive orders because they know other things are being used, and I don't think that's where we want to be. They said, take a list that's well thought out, that tends to be a little bit larger in the beginning, and then work your way down from there. So right now, we don't know what is being done in Arizona. I know that one laboratory has told me that they have seen at least 18 of these pesticides, which I think is higher than Colorado's number. So we don't really know quite yet what our experience is or what we're going to have, what's an Arizona list. I mean, we can try to go through what we think is being used out there, but you have to look at what and try to encompass everything that we could see out there and then work our way down. So I just wanted to give a little perspective on that, is that, what's that? Oh.
It's Steve. He's talking to me all the time. My apologies.
Jay Neary here. I wanted to share a couple of perspectives. You're talking about California, some of the other states that were failing for these types of things. They also test for up to parts per billion, so they're getting down to a smaller amount. We've here, Earl Cup tested over 5,000 different products from various dispensaries. We use Seaford Labs, and he does a small list of pesticides, and I'll be honest, I haven't found a single one, but he only tests parts per million, and strongly believes that, deeper testing would find a few more things. That's just my experience. Through 5,000 things, we haven't found a single one, but we've only been looking for a short list and parts per million. So maybe we consider parts per billion in whatever list we do come up with.
I think I've been through all of the labs except for one. There's varying technologies that are out there, so I don't think you can really look at what has been tested on your products in the past to compare with where we're going to be.
My products are every dispensary in Arizona, so we go out and we pull samples from every single one, so it's quite varied.
Right, again, but from where I've seen, the technologies are very different, and some of them aren't even up to where they're going to need to be able to do these lists. So if we were to adopt, the good thing about the Oregon list is you only need one instrument, which is just $400,000. So it's but if you were to adopt the California list, which is a lot lower levels and everything, you would have to have an additional instrument, a GCMS spec, to be able to hit those limits. So now you're looking at 700 to 800,000. The expense goes up, and then everybody's pretending they can see those levels. Because when I was back at a conference in Chicago talking to the Agilent people, they said we all are just kind of believing we can see California limits and all. So we want to be able to have limits, and Oregon actually worked out their limits based on what the labs could actually see, and then with the limit of quantitation, and then they doubled it so that for the safety limits. So these levels are definitely should be obtainable with the one instrument. And
I mean, there are ways to flush, and
it's a LC triple quad is the typical instrument for that.
We can see down to parts per billion, but we report out in parts per million because it's easy on everybody's eyes. We used to do parts per billion. That's what we see and detect, but we changed that because you just multiply it times 1,000 and give them they like to see PPM, not PPB on the reports.
so is your machine detecting down to those limits, or are you doing the mathematical calculation to give those limits?
We can see. We have the triple quad. We can see
machine is
parts per
seeing it,
billion.
okay.
And this
So
is
she
how-
doesn't, she's not $1 million in on the piece of equipment, and she can do it.
And
Well, not everything needs to be PPB because it's got to be based off of public safety. It's got to be based off of.
Well, just pesticides right now we're talking about.
But pesticides, just because it's there, does not necessarily mean it's health risk. And so I mean, the recommendation should be based not only off of what is feasible and cost effective, but is it relevant? And not everything is relevant at the PPB, and most things are relevant at the parts per million. Some things need to be PPB because of its just very toxic nature. And so I think that the Oregon list does address that. I believe they even had a committee that had clinicians, which we do not have on our group here, which again I think is a shame. But if it's a starting point, but I would like to know if there's anything on this list, on the Oregon list, that anybody in here has not seen or really disagrees with just from the basic premise of what's posted.
George Griffith, the Lab Association. And I think that's what we're taking a look at, compound by compound, and that process just needs to work. One other point on parts per billion, EPA, Codex, UN, and World Health all look at parts per million, and I also think we need to take a look at what PPB would do in terms of creating a artificial choke point.
Can we go back to the member recommendation slide? So again, these two things seem somewhat inconsistent to me. Can you explain what you meant here? Are you using is the recommendation to use the Oregon list or to use the Colorado list? And it appears that the rationale for one of these is that the current Arizona hemp program is utilizing the Colorado list.
So, because there was a call for recommendations, yes, I submitted and did some homework on that, but the recommendation for the Oregon list did not come from me, and I think that's coming from the department. Or maybe another member, and I'm not opposed to that, but I also, as a starting point for Arizona, given that we have cannabis in the state in two different forms, marijuana program and then the hemp program, it seems like a good, and the hemp program already established. Look, we're going to just start with Colorado for right now, and I understand the argument, actually, Steve, that you made, that the state, they're locked into it. I don't feel like we're locked in and couldn't make any changes with the pesticides just for the same argument with the heavy metals. We have time to be able to make changes. The two departments with the same plant having different rules for pesticides is really going, as a hemp producer in the state, licensed hemp producer in the state, that's a little bit frustrating, not impossible, obviously, because we're not doing it together in the same places, but I just think to have the different departments for the same plant to have different rules is a cluster.
We'd be glad to have them come to our list. I'm not sure if hemp is inhaled or smoked. There's differences here. So when we're talking about safeties and everything else, I'm not sure it's totally the same animal here that we're talking.
And I'll clarify, any of the slides that say member recommendations without an ADHS specific note came from the members and not the department.
Okay. So based on my sort of overview of watching the states roll out these various programs, I know that there were a lot of problems in Oregon. There were a lot of choke points. There were a lot of people that were waiting months to have their product tested, and that meant that there were a lot of patients that were getting their products from the black market. It appears that the rollout in Colorado was less bumpy. My inclination then would be to move towards the Colorado list and with a recommendation that it be reviewed and updated based on scientific information as it goes forward.
I'll give this back to you in a second, Hope. One quick response. Steve, we see as a manufacturer, hemp and cannabis is more or less the same. This one's high in THC, the other one's high in CBD. Both, are intended to be broad spectrum. And we make products, edibles, infused products specifically with both of those. So for us, they're equivalent. The only difference is at a federal standard of 0.3%. And so, I can see the value of having parallels in terms of the pesticides and whatnot. The only distinction that I come up with is that you're likely to see more hemp grown outdoors than you are going to be seeing regular cannabis for many reasons, and that there might be an inclination to use different pesticides as a result of that.
Since 2015, when the Colorado rules or testing rules were in place, it's been a nightmare for pesticide analysis. And they continue to make changes, they add, they take off. It's, as Colorado said, don't use our program. Oregon, and I was one of the, well, how should I say, I witnessed the Oregon rollout as it happened, and it was very, very, most of these things are used. They added some at the last minute. That hurt. But this is a great list. The Oregon list really works good. It's very robust, and when I'm in Oregon, I know it's a very safe product. I can't say the same for Colorado.
So, because, and again, Colorado totally thinks that their list is inadequate. because it's not addressing what's actually out there. And so what they're doing is they're spending millions of dollars right now to try to get the state lab up, because they have to have somebody who's going to do say exactly what is being used and everything else. So most of the states had said a good place to start is the Oregon list. Instrument manufacturers are setting up. I think when Oregon started this, they didn't quite know what instrumentation would be necessary and everything. From what I'm seeing in the laboratories, they already have the correct instrumentation. I believe our rollout would be a lot smoother than anything that you saw in Oregon.
Are these all one machine, like Oregon's 50 and Colorado's 13? Would either of those all be ran once on one machine?
Yeah.
Steve, I know you had a first row seat to the Oregon rollout. Can you speak to what the problems there were and what the bottlenecks were, and whether it was
Well,
related to this or something else?
the main problem was we saw the list 4 months in advance, so we all were testing all of our material, making our concentrates, and with a month to go, they added 2 items to the list. 2 pesticides to the list, and 90% of all of our product got dumped in the dirt. And it was a lot of product.
So this is something, just to reiterate, the department is not trying to create a burden, so we're hoping to have recommendations from the council and rules drafted early enough in the process so that, by spring of next year, we know what we're going to be working with well in advance of the November 2020 deadline. So hopefully that is something that we can.
All I can say is if we screw it up, it's on Steve.
Yeah, okay, all right, that's on the record.
I'm making the suggestion we go with the Oregon list. I know what we need to do there.
But so it's your opinion that because we have this far enough in advance that we would avoid the problems that Oregon had?
Yes.
I emailed you, Steve, over the problem children of this list from Oregon. I want to consider those because. Right, and then a breakdown issue too on some of them. Some of them don't, 1 or 2 don't hold up even through a curve very easily, much less the sample. So I would just consider those compounds of the labs having a hard time
So would you recommend
validating.
scratching those out?
I don't know how big of a health concern they are, but they're definitely problem children for us as far as calibration and a curve holding up and getting samples ran, because if they fail, we recalibrate and they degrade real easy, or the sensitivity is very, very low on them to see at the very low points, even with a triple quad. So I sent,
What if we raise the limit of those?
depends on what detection limit, yeah. It just depends. Right now, we go as low as we can see because we don't have any regulated limits, so we can at least report out what we can see down to. So that could be a possibility, but you still have, I think, 2 that degrade really easily. That it's going to be hard to calibrate, run a PT pass, and such as stuff like that. But I don't know what a health concern those are. So the problem children are going to be for everybody, I'm going to assume, with the same instrumentation, and we're all getting the standards from the same companies. Just throwing it out there.
And how many compounds are you talking about on this list?
I don't know. 2 that were of utmost concern, maybe 5 or 6 that I mentioned, and I don't remember what they are. But I emailed them all to Steve. But
So this is Hope. I'd like to make a motion to table. Tabitha, if you could resend your list so we can all have that list. And we've got to do our homework on this one. This one's important. And I don't know if it'd be possible to ask the department to maybe have a clinician, somebody who can speak to the actual, at least to have a recommendation for a clinician to speak to the health risks on the list that we're approving for the Oregon list?
We've got 1 toxicologist remotely on staff, so I can inquire about availability.
If they could at least look at the list,
Yeah.
Oregon list, and then Tabitha's recommendations, and have some feedback by the next meeting, because I don't think anyone here is qualified to speak to changing the ppm limits, and none of us have that scope.
I'll resend my list with the, our reporting limit, so you know. It might be different than this. We might have went lower. I'm not quite sure. But I know we started off the Oregon list when we developed it.
Do you have a LC triple quad?
Yes,
Okay. So just to make sure that we
we do.
have the same instruments and all. Okay.
So there's a motion to table the pesticides discussion, take a look at Tabitha's list and see if we can get toxicology input on some of those problem children as well to see what the potential health impacts would be. Is that, am I summarizing that well?
On a good note, the rest of the list is pretty ideal to run for. It's not bad.
Is there a second to that motion? All in favor? All opposed? So passes. Once we get the list from Tabitha, I'll put together a summary of the things that we talked about in today's meeting, and we'll get some of those materials out in advance so folks can review them. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'd like to move on to solvents and see if we can get through some good discussion on solvents before I summarize to wrap up. So just as a note, when we initially presented to you, when Steve did, we had a preliminary table from Oregon on what their solvent lists and limits were. This year, they've really reviewed that and decreased their solvents list from 45 down to 24, so you can see what was removed on the solvents list here in your slides. And we've got a couple of differing member recommendations related to solvents too. So either utilizing Oregon's list of parameters, referring back to this new pared down list, or at a minimum, testing process finished material for solvents based on known extraction processes, and those compounds are listed here.
Ryan Hurley, Arizona Dispensary Association. Tabitha, may I ask, is it significantly more difficult or more expensive to test for the 24 solvents versus the, 7 or 8 or 10 identified down here?
The problem is getting standards for all of those, because you can't usually find an all-in-one with all of those compounds because they degrade against each other. They're what they're made in have to be different materials, like either it's methanol or DMSO or whatever it needs to be in. So it's really hard when you have a big list like that. And honestly, I wasn't for this Oregon list anyway, because like I said, my first couple years using the mass spec, I ran screens on all the concentrates. And the list I come up with, which is primarily what whoever's recommendations this is, this downsized list is typically all you see, usually, and you don't see these other compounds when I did screens. So, but it can take some time to calibrate for all of those compounds based on the different state. They can't be combined like an all-in-one, like most tests.
Based on my experience, that secondary list here that's not Oregon's is encompasses everything that I've seen used as well.
I think it's missing ethanol and pentane.
Though, well, pentane, yeah, I do see pentane, but a lot of times those are in isolates. And then, what was the first one? Ethanol? Yeah, but honestly, ethanol, a lot of states are starting to remove that. I ran children's cold syrup without said no alcohol, and it had alcohol and ethanol in it. So it's such a big threshold for that they can consider saying it doesn't even have it in it to sell it on the market. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of states are actually removing those alcohols because they're not harmful. But again, I'm not,
To be smoked, though?
I don't know. I can't decipher between that, but I know a lot of them have removed ethanol from their list. But we still analyze for it. But there's a lot that are all over 1,000, but it's still pretty safe.
No, I had an experience once, I can only take it for what was told to me, but a event goer reported that they went out to their car and they went to go blow in their DUI machine, so they obviously had a DUI, and they failed. And the only thing that they could attribute that to was vapes that they had tried that may have contained a high level of ethanol. I found vapes that contained 5, 10,000 ppm of ethanol left over in it. Some of the communication back to me was that's how we get the consistency that we're looking for. So there's a general consensus that it's okay, but it's definitely definitely out there, and it's in higher percentages than what we should be seeing. I mean, even 5,000 ppm is a limit on a pharmaceutical that you take, a Tylenol or ibuprofen. You may have to come up with that.
So the one thing I would add is that I don't know how you can base what, I know that
I can only take it for face value for what it was told, yeah.
you've seen what you've seen, but we're trying to encompass everything that we're going to see from all the different products out there. Michigan has seen 23 out of their 24 that are on their list, all but methylene chloride. So again, what they recommend is to start with a larger list to see what is out there, not just what you think is being used because of certain businesses and all. And then from there, I assume that's why Oregon cut theirs down, was they started with a bigger list and then they didn't see any of those solvents, so they cut those down and all. So I would be a little cautious about going with what we think is in the market right now and what is out there.
This is Hope. Could you move forward one slide?
This way?
Yep.
Thank you.
I would like to propose that this column, because it has basically what was on the slide before, but I would like to add 4 compounds that is not on this table. And the 4 compounds that I'm about to list are actually used in the processing of these concentrates: ethanol, ethyl acetates, acetonitrile, and pentane. And the pentane, ethyl acetate, and ethanol at 5,000 ppm, acetonitrile at 410 ppm. Added to this list column that's here.
Where did you have ethanol?
At 5,000.
You had both ethanol and ethyl acetate at 5,000?
And pentane.
And pentane.
So the only reason why I'm adding those is because they're actually used in the processing of a lot of the products, and they're solvent, and they would be a health risk if they were above those USP limits.
Hey, Hope, Jay here. I want to ask you about acetone. Particularly in non-solvents, I find this naturally occurring, and I've had limits over 1,000 ppm. So in a case like this where we had a non-solvent, which we knew acetone wasn't used, but it's 1,150 ppm, what happens?
Be remediated.
But I mean, it's a non-solvent, or so you mean they have to make it into something else to try to clean it out? That would be the only option.
Do you want to speak to that, Tabitha?
Did you say 1,100 ppm? That for a non-solvent?
150 ppm of acetone.
No, it would be.
Oh, I just wanted to say that the
acetone.
naturally occurring is usually for a plant product under 50 parts per million, and if it's concentrate, typically under 100 to 150 if it's a concentrated form. That's naturally occurring. Anything other than that has been added to it somehow or contaminated.
That's what we saw at C4 as well.
I ran tests on Cheez-Its and sodas and found acetone in those two, above what the plant products were. It was something years ago. He remembers it. Throwing it out there. I was curious.
I'll have to look at what I have, and I believe I have something over 1,000. So that's just why it came to my mind, is that I had disqualified it. I think my threshold is 5,000, and I had disqualified it for being over the threshold. And we did some other investigation. It came out to be a non-solvent, but it still had high-level acetone, which we investigated was naturally occurring. And I don't know if there are other things like that that might happen with some of these other ones.
Yeah.
Acetone's the only one that I've known because I've seen it consistently and just running flour bud on the residual solvent. And I'm like, where is this acetone coming from? And that's why I researched it. It's the only solvent I actually saw in just the flour product.
And it was always within, well below the 1,000 ppm.
That set us spinning for quite some time. The introduction of acetone for a long time. It spun everybody for a long
Oh my goodness, yes. Everybody, I don't have acetone in that. Yes, you do. But yeah, that was about a year and a half of raising our report limit so we could say it's naturally occurring under 50 parts per million. But no, people use acetone for cleaning their concentrate machines, and we found that that contaminated a lot of their product, although they didn't use acetone as a solvent. It's just from cleaning.
You use isopropyl alcohol on your stainless steel tables, it naturally occurs acetone into the air.
Right.
So Hope, just, can I ask you to clarify that again? So you're making a motion that we use the limits in this table plus which ones again?
Ethanol, 5,000 ppm. Ethyl acetate, 5,000 ppm. Acetonitrile, 410 ppm. Pentane, 5,000 ppm. Yeah.
Can I, point of clarification on that motion, less than or equal to those values, correct?
Less than or equal to. Thank you.
I'd like them to be 1,000 or less. Ethanol's not on a not approved list for some states when it comes to extractions. I know it's food grade usually, but
I'm sorry, Jay, I didn't hear you.
I'd like to propose 1,000 ppm for ethanol. You know, ethanol is on a not approved list in some states for even for use, and you know, I mean, putting up 5,000 is what most pharmaceuticals would have, but everything else is at 1,000, and some states don't even approve it. I don't think we need to give it any more room than we have to.
I'm going off of the USP limits for safety.
Right, like pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and so I think for a starting point, and we can always, I agree it's worth revisiting if it becomes problematic.
USP doesn't refer to smoking, inhaling it, it's just ingesting it. So, you know, it may be okay to ingest 5,000 ppm of ethanol, but smoking it is a different story. We don't know.
This is Matt. That's why I say we leave it open-ended and then revisit it with that ability to edit later. So I'd say 5, leave it at 5K.
I'd be supportive of Hope's motion.
So we have a, okay, so we have a motion and a second to adopt this table with the limits in it, adding 4 additional compounds, ethanol at 5,000, less than or equal to 5,000 ppm, ethyl acetate less than or equal to 5,000 ppm, acetonitrile less than or equal to 410 ppm, and pentane less than or equal to 5,000 ppm. All in favor? All opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to see if we can do the methods real quick. I think this is a really fast one before I wrap up, but maybe not.
Take it over, Hope. Waiting on you over there. Page 6. I think it's 3 months.
I think we're hopeful. Come on. Hope, this is Hope again. I make a motion for the method consideration for residual solvents to be any EPA, AO, AC, or in-house developed method that is validated by OAC Appendix K and any other federal or international method that meets the criteria of EPA methods.
Is there a second to that motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. So we got through a lot today. We still have some other testing things on the slides. There's things with water activity, with terpenes, some others as well. So I'd just like to recap a little bit. I'm going to put together a summary of all the motions that have passed to date. I'd like to request any research that you all do or information you've been asked to provide to be submitted to the department as soon as you can get it, so the council members have time before our meeting in December to review. We still have quite a bit to get through before we conclude, and our report is due to the legislature at the end of December. So we need to come back to what we've tabled on the heavy metals as well as the pesticides, and we've got some information coming back from Matt on metals and Tabitha on pesticides, as well as hopefully a toxicologist that can come weigh in on some of that. And then we need to get through information and recommendations relating to sampling, sample collection, sample storage, reporting of results, remediation, and disposal. It's a lot to bite off. What I'll do is prep you with some of the considerations that department has for you to review, as well as any recommendations that have come in from council members. If you have additional recommendations or consideration on any of those topics, please submit them as soon as possible so we can package them up and get them back out for review. So we're prepared to have a discussion on them at our next meeting in December. And as a reminder for sampling, we're going to be looking at the homogeneity of edibles, as well as some of the latency testing and things. And then as a final recommendation that's come for additional items to consider, we've got some recommendations regarding just the process and communication about what all the rules are and how the department can support implementation of these so that it doesn't have an undue burden on dispensaries or patients, as well as some of the timing related to the act. Murray.
I just want to make sure that it's very clear that when we discuss sampling, that we have a conversation about process validation as a mechanism to reduce the amount of physical testing required. Like honestly, for this to succeed, we need to take a page from Oregon and address that.
Got it. Okay, so with that, we will have our next meeting on December the 10th, I believe.
Did you not throw the third one in there?
We were not able to get any room availability for meeting on the 3rd or piece, yeah, availability. I hope so. Please prepare prior to the next meeting. If you've got questions or extra research that you need done, please come ready to discuss that and send us anything you can in advance so we can package it up and send it all out to you for review. Steve?
Question, can we extend our hour and a half to ensure that we do get it done?
We'll double check to make sure that we've got that availability to extend an hour and a half, yeah. 2 hours, 2.5 hours, as long as it takes. Oh, geez.
Absolutely.
I can't feed you guys, so, bring snacks. Adjourn.
Oh, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, and we've got seconds. All right, meeting is adjourned.